Oh, hey friends, it's Josh Yeager on a golf course in Palm Springs. Some call me the Sultan of Settlements for estate settlements. Others call me the probate poobah. My mom calls me son. I am out here driving around in the early morning, having interesting talks with myself about subjects of trust and estate administration that I think are interesting, and maybe you will too. The subject that I'm thinking about right now is the QTIP Trust, Qualified Terminable Interest Property Trust. This is where typically Dad died years ago, and Dad's got a lot of dough. Dad's been married a couple of times, so he's now on wife 3, who's probably the same age as the kids from wife 1. And so the kids are a little bit bummed that all of Dad's money got put into a QTIP trust, Qualified Terminable Interest Property Trust, and wife 3, sometimes referred to as the gold digger in the prayer for relief, is taking distributions from the trust. The kids from wife 1, sometimes referred to as the pot-smoking kids, or the ne'er-do-wells, are ticked off about how much money is being distributed from the QTIP trust to wife number 3. And they're ticked off because they are what's called residual beneficiaries. They get what's left over. And so they're thinking, the trustee ought to invest this money for growth. Like it ought to be in NVIDIA and Bitcoin and Google, because they want as much growth as possible, because they want to have something left over when the gold digger dies, because they're the residual beneficiaries. Now, the wife 3 appropriately argues, look, this trust says I'm supposed to get the net income from the trust. The income from the trust, not the growth or appreciation. So if we invest in a company like Amazon that doesn't have dividends, or Berkshire Hathaway that doesn't produce any income, it does me, the income beneficiary, no good. I want this thing invested for income. And so she appropriately yells at the trustee and says, look, this ought to be invested in treasury bills, earning 5% interest, so that I can get my distribution, so that I can live the lifestyle that I have become accustomed to. Now, the poor trustee is in the middle, thinking, how am I supposed to reconcile these competing interests? Because I, as a trustee, have a duty to balance the interests of the beneficiaries of a trust, even when those interests are antithetical to each other. Almost an impossible situation to be in. Now, it happens to be that this kind of fact pattern exists all the time, and poor trustees are stuck in the bind of the interests of one beneficiary, the income beneficiary in this case, and the interests of the residual beneficiary, the kids in this case, are antithetical. So here's one way that the QTIP problem can be resolved. Rather than arguing about, well, what does health, welfare, maintenance, and support mean? Is it appropriate within that definition to buy a Porsche for the third spouse, or to buy a lovely little condo in Palm Springs for the third spouse, or provide for regular trips to Vail? Is that within the definition of health, welfare, maintenance, and support that the trustee is to consider when managing this trust and determining what the distribution should be? Because the trustee can distribute more than net income. They can distribute principal if doing so is consistent with the health, welfare, maintenance, and support of the beneficiary. Deciding what that is can be a ticklish issue. So one approach is to say, you know what, let's do this. Let's change how this trust works and not have it be net income mandatory and then distributions of principal. Those two things get fought over. How should we invest the money? What is health, welfare, maintenance, support actually mean in this case? let's just manage it like a uni-trust. Well, what's a uni-trust? A uni-trust is when you take the corpus of the trust, the value of the trust, and say, look, we're going to distribute 4% to mom. We're going to probably have 1% in administrative fees. Pay the trustee, pay the CPA, pay the attorney, pay some people, right? Investment advisor. And the rest of the growth stays in the trust for the residual beneficiaries. So they'll get like, I don't know, 3% long-term appreciation, which protects their purchasing power. They're basically trying to equal inflation. So if you amend, or if you enter an agreement with all the parties, the pot-smoking kids, ne'er-do-wells, and the gold digger, and say, look, let's create a win-win. Let's have this be fair. Let's have the first 4% of the trust growth be distributed to the third spouse, and let's have everything else be retained in the trust. That way we're balancing the interests of the current beneficiary and the residual beneficiaries, and we're fulfilling our duties as a trustee. So that's a pretty slick trick. You do it with a tool called a notice of proposed action. That's basically the trustee has a notice. Hey guys, look, you're all fighting over this stuff. I'm in a bind. There's no decision that I can make that makes everyone happy. So let's do the split the baby approach, where income beneficiary gets the first 4%, whether there's 4% of income or not. Say there's 2% of income. Great, she gets the first 2% plus principal of 2%. And that should give us enough money to pay everyone to keep the trust administered, and to have enough growth to preserve the purchasing power for the residual beneficiaries. Great little trick. Nobody's perfectly happy with that outcome, which is probably the right outcome then. And good approach to stop the family fights between the gold digger and the pot-smoking knuckleheads. Ciao. Best of luck in your trust administration. Trustee-help.com. Trustee-help.com. Call now.